where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. So, what happens when one is moving through different countries during their childhood year? What happens when you enter in a cross cultural marriage and end up moving countries again? And what happens when you have kids who also move through different countries with their parents? Such people, as mentioned in our earlier episodes, are called third culture kids and individuals. In view of the increase in global mobility since the last few years, more and more individuals are becoming third culture individuals. Yet, that term can mean different things for different people, especially when they are actually living through the experience. Some coping mechanisms, however, can come in handy at times. Dear listeners, for our sub series on third culture individuals, I'm happy to introduce Anna Seidel as our guest for today. Thank you, Anna, for joining me. Anna is a third culture individual herself and has lived abroad most of her life. She's currently raising her own third culture kids in a cross cultural marriage. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
So, Anna, I believe you just correct me where I'm wrong because these are a little bit of facts that I have. I believe that you were 4 years old when you moved with your parents from US to Germany. Do you remember anything of that move? You were just 4.
I actually remember the hotel room when we landed in Germany. You would think I'd remember the flight or saying goodbye or the excitement of packing up for something, but I don't. I have a few scattered memories of our time in the States, but I don't remember the move. It really starts in the hotel room in Germany and my sister being fascinated by the little individually wrapped cheeses at breakfast at the hotel. That's where my journey, my memory journey starts, really. Nothing before that.
And which place in Germany was that?
We landed in Darmstadt and for the military at the time. And the system was actually great because we had what they called a sponsor who was like a mentor, like a buddy that helped us arrive and figure out how everything worked. We had support finding houses, but we had a teacher. My dad was a teacher, and there was another teacher in her family that basically took us by the hand and made sure we got settled, which was a wonderful system.
That's actually very nice. That's a huge support system. But what was it like then growing up as an American in Germany in those days in the 80s and 90s? Because I remember that even 12 years ago, even in big cities like Hamburg, very few people spoke English. One couldn't even get a toothbrush from a shop. So how was the experience?
Well, being in Darmstadt was different from other places, perhaps, because Darmstadt was at the time a military center. There were lots and lots and lots of people from the military and associated contractors and teachers and the like. And we were not well received. They were often Americans isolated themselves. Being in the military, they would be there only for 2 years and constantly on rotation. For us, it was a little bit different because we were civilians and we lived in a German village, but yet we had that stigma of being with the military. So there was a bit of frowned upon. We got made fun of for how we spoke English, and it just generally wasn't very comfortable. So what my sister and I ended up doing is that when we were out in town, we would speak German. We rarely spoke German together at home and certainly don't do it today. But as children, that was one way we dealt with it, to be as inconspicuous as possible. We would speak German and act German when we were out and about.
And when you were, of course, then studying in German, I gather, in that case, people then, I think you were trying to be inconspicuous. So did that work?
Yes, we both were cultural chameleons, and we very much managed to fit in, whether it's clothing, how we speak, gestures. Their language is just one part of general appearance and fitting in. And through our body language, our clothing and everything, we very much blended in. Nobody would have known that we were not Germans walking down the street in shops and whatever. By the same token, if we went when we were in the States in the summer, we would become more American and then have that more bigger gestures and louder voices and a little bit more energy, perhaps in public spaces than in Germany. By having two languages as well, when we were in the States, German would become a bit of a secret language if we needed to say something and not have everybody else understand us.
There are two ways one could go with that. So I'm so glad you had a sister to share that with. Otherwise, it would be an isolating factor. But did that sort of do anything with your identities, like identity crisis during those years, back and forth?
Well, I definitely know that I've never, and to this day, I've never felt completely at home anywhere. Like I really, truly belong. But I've also realized over the years that I don't want to completely belong. I kind of like having that bit of difference and having just something that sets me apart. I think it might be a coping mechanism to accept that and say, okay, I don't fit in here completely because I am not like everyone. But it's difficult to say, really. I mean, maybe people that grow up in the same place and have always lived in one town feel that too. I don't know. Perhaps everyone wants to fit in, but yet also very much wants to be an individual. I think that's an interesting question that I haven't explored much with people that are very strongly monocultural. But for me, I like being able to figure out what I need to do so that I don't immediately stand out. And now some places I've lived that's been harder than others. Living in China was obviously that we had to stand out. There was no way that we would not stand out. And then you accept that. But you still work within, the possibilities to interact with people as much as possible wherever you are.
That's interesting. So before going to the next part, since you mentioned you don't know how people are, do they feel the same thing if they are from a monoculture? So there I can add to my two bits because I really don't fit in anywhere in many places, I think. So though it was a monoculture for the first 21 years, at least in India, and I'm just like that. I'm assuming there are other people like that who don't fit into groups. Certain fitting of a group, whether it would be a school or somewhere else, I would still be different. I mean, probably because I also never tried to fit in. So I've one of those, even when coming here and crossing cultures, I figured this in my head later. If I'm a square peg, I don't have to round my edges to fit in a round hole. I better go out there and create my own square hole.
Yeah, see, so that kind of confirms it. There's the cultural aspect, but there's the individual aspect as well. And not everybody wants to fit in or even wants to try to fit in. And I actually think more people than you expect feel like that, but it's hard to divide it. So for my part, in Germany, I very much can blend in if I don't mention that I'm not German, at least in this area. Few people would know that I'm not. My name is very German. I know how to present myself, how to speak very German. And I like having that superpower or whatever, that ability to not stand out if I choose to, and yet knowing that I can if I want to.
That's beautiful. I also read in one of your blogs that when you went back to the US for, I think, high school or higher studies somewhere, that you went through a phase of cultural shock. So do share that. What was that all about?
I went back twice. Once I went during high school, I went for a semester. There's a lot to unpack there. And then again, I went after I graduated. I got my Abitur in Germany. I went back to the US to go to university for a year as well. And both experiences were dramatically different. As a 19-year-old, I think it was probably bigger because in Germany, we enjoy other freedoms. I had traveled quite a bit on my own or with friends. Within Europe, drinking wasn't a big deal. As a 19-year-old in Germany, you've got some experience with that. But then to be dropped into a dorm with a bunch of freshmen, so they're usually 17, 18-year-olds in the US who had little to no experience of being on their own, who were not legally allowed to drink, but who could get access to it. All these things were such a big deal to them, and they weren't to me. So that caused a lot of discord, and I definitely stood out. Just by age, I was more mature, but I was forced to stay in the dorms because it was my first year at college. But interestingly, I settled into the structure of university in the US and how it works and classes and so on very well. When I came back to Germany to go to university, I struggled because I found the university system confusing. And that took me quite a while because I'd gotten used to the US university system. And so I struggled returning here, not with so much with the living in part, but definitely with how universities work. So wherever you go, there's always different layers and levels of cultural adaptation, culture shock, if you want to call it that.
That's interesting. From that time onwards, can you just take us through your life journey? Because after that, it got confusing because I saw that you went, between Germany and US, and somewhere you went to Africa, somewhere you in between. I think before Africa you got married, or do share that, and China happened, and then back Africa, and then so like do do the jigsaw puzzle for us, put the pieces together.
Okay, the quick version. So after university in the States, I came back to Germany, went to university back in Darmstadt, actually, where I'd spent most of my years growing up. I got an engineering degree and then took a job in Switzerland. So I went from university in Germany, I went straight to Switzerland. And that was a big change mostly because I had assumed that Switzerland was like Germany, which it isn't. So I worked in Switzerland for a number of years, went as an expat to the United States for my Swiss company and to the South, which is an area that I was very unfamiliar with because home in the US was always Oregon and the Northwest.
I'll pause you in between here and there where I have questions. So you mentioned Germany and Switzerland, which one does think that should be similar. So in your experience, why and how not?
Switzerland is different because of geography and history. It's actually the two factors. Geography simply because of its high mountains and long valleys where people historically have been isolated from each other or very difficult to get to each other. So you develop sort of your own way of doing things and ways of thinking. And historically also because Switzerland has a unique status within Europe of being independent, of being neutral. And I think both of those factors have led to differences compared to their neighbors, and that's neighbors on all sides. You've got the Germans and the Austrians, so both German speaking on two sides, and then French and Italy on the other sides. And Switzerland is unique in many ways from all of those. The fact that Switzerland has 4 national languages, and they have a lot of intercultural communication issues within the country, and things to deal with there probably also influences that. But for me, as a young engineer, I was surprised, mostly probably because I thought that it would be easier than it was. And that made a big difference when I got to Switzerland. And the biggest problem was really integrating, finding people to do things with and like-minded, because it's very hard to break into the groups in Switzerland.
But wouldn't that have been also in any other place one moves, let's say, from one city to another, also in the same country? So what was it about that? What's interesting for me is the big difference beyond the language between Germany and Switzerland.
Well, I know that for sure it's difficult to find friends and integrate in Germany as well. I found Switzerland to be harder because there are fewer new people, fewer foreigners. Then the Swiss are very happy with the friends that they have and the people they've known since they were children. And there's no need for anyone else. They're not sitting there waiting to make friends. And there's a bit of maybe some skepticism. Will this person stay? Or, will I invest time and then they leave again? But generally, I think they're just very content with what they have and who they have. They are not very experienced, generally speaking, with making new friends as adults, maybe. And now, again, I was in a more remote region of Switzerland, but might be very different in cities. So I'm just extrapolating here. I don't really know the answer.
Okay, no, I get it on. I mean, I get a picture. And in which country you've gone through, going back to before I stopped you between Germany and Switzerland, do continue. And I think a little after that, you sort of got married, if I remember correctly. So do continue. I will only interrupt when I find something I have to really ask.
I don't mind. I go off on a tangent. So my now husband and I have been going out for a very long time. We started going out when we were still at high school in Germany. He is a cross-cultural child, not so much a third culture kid. Third culture kids are part of the group of cross-cultural children. And by having an English mother and a German father, my husband is also a cross-culture kid, so he has that experience of multiple cultures at home, which I think might have been just a mutual experience that we had in some way that attracted us beyond other things. Anyway, so we'd been going out for a very long time when we did eventually decide that we would get married. And before the wedding, I was, like I said, as an expat in the US. We were planning our wedding, and then he had the opportunity to go to South Africa as an expat. And I remember he sending me a text message saying, "How about South Africa? You want to go?" And my immediate answer was yes. Never for even a moment thinking about the impact or how we were changing the trajectory of our lives at that point. But I quit my job in Switzerland. There was no way to maintain that or keep it open. We got married, sort of all happened at the same time. And in December, we found ourselves suddenly in South Africa. And I found myself from being a very busy product manager, engineer, to being an accompanying spouse and having absolutely nothing to do. And that was difficult. We didn't have children yet. We had just gotten married and moved. It was a new place. Everyone my age was either having children, taking them to school and busy with that, or working. So finding connection in South Africa at the time was also difficult. And just having all this time during the day to fill was a challenge at the beginning. Carrying on from there, we spent a few years in South Africa, did have our first child there, and then returned to Germany for 4 years. And at this point, I hadn't lived in Germany for a while, so that was new and different. And in Germany, in those 4 years, we had our second child. And then neither of us were particularly content in Germany. It was difficult after the time in South Africa, where we did eventually integrate well and had wonderful friends. Then to be back in Germany, where we felt a bit isolated and overwhelmed. So when the chance came to return to South Africa, we took it immediately and went back to South Africa for another 4 years, during which time we had another baby. So every time we moved, there was a child involved up to that point. And then I remember a friend in South Africa talking about their impending move to China. And I said, well, that's a place I would never go. But of course, after 4 years in South Africa, we did move on to Beijing. And in Beijing, I remember being on our look and see trip and being in traffic and said, I will never drive in Beijing. Well, 3 months after we arrived in Beijing, I had my driver's license and I was driving. So I have learned not to say I will never do something, because opinions change, circumstances change. And so I found that I am willing to do things that I thought I never would before. After 4 years again in Beijing, we returned to Germany late in the summer of 2019, which turned out to be a very difficult time for the world. And it was a very difficult time to return to come to a new place. So we came back to an area of Germany that we did not know. We didn't have anybody, no connections or anything here. 3 kids started school. We're just starting to make the first few friends and connections when obviously we all went into lockdown. So we spent the first 2 years effectively in Germany isolated, which was a difficult time as well, and felt a bit like another move, like a new experience. And we also found that some of the skills that we had developed from moving to new places and having to fend for ourselves and spending a lot of time as a family together actually helped us during lockdowns. We didn't feel quite as unprepared once the first couple of weeks of everybody was up in arms and didn't know how to deal with it. But we realized that we did have some skills and some experience that helped us deal with lockdown, deal with being isolated, because wherever we were, we never lived near family. We always had to stay in touch with grandparents, aunts and uncles via some Zoom, Skype, emails. So that wasn't new to us. So we had tools that we didn't realize we would be needing in this way, but they did come in handy. And now it's been nearly 5 years that we're back in Germany and feeling like we're arriving. I feel effectively we've only had 3 years really to settle in. It hasn't been the full 5 because the lockdown years don't really count towards the arriving in my mind.
So, in which country did you find it the most difficult to live in? And in which one was it the easiest?
Oh, I have never been asked that before.
Never say never.
Yeah, never say never. I have to think. Easiest, well, probably South Africa, simply because we, as well-off expats, we were able to afford a very nice life. We were always aware of our privilege and very appreciative of what we had and what we were able to do. But it was a very good life with friends and connections that even though we've been away for many years now, we still maintain. We still feel close to the country and to her people. And South Africans are wonderful. They're welcoming and friendly. Wherever you meet them in the world, they're always happy to have you. So that's probably the easiest. And the most difficult, I would say, well, coming to Germany was not easy. So that might have been one of the hardest landings that we had, especially when we came with a small baby and we moved to a village that was very isolating for me with a new baby and nobody to help support me. That was probably the hardest country to settle into, apart from the initial shock of living in Switzerland at the time too. But as if I look back and think about the experience overall, arriving in Germany with a small baby, very small baby, and nobody to help me and support me was probably the most difficult one.
It must have been also very isolating, I gather.
Definitely. I mean, nobody even to ask how to do things with the baby. My family's far away. At the time, Skype was something that we used, but it wasn't like a regular thing that we didn't have WhatsApp to make quick calls and things. It was very isolating.
So that must have been around 2000 something, right? 2004?
That was the end of 2007, so 2008.
So that is when you came back from South Africa with a small baby for the first time back to Germany.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that I understand. Right. And every parent has their own unique way of raising children. And however, some of that is influenced by their own upbringing and some that of the country culture. In your moves, did you pick up some nuances of parenting from the different cultures? You were in Germany, South Africa, Beijing, and of course you are American. So like parenting style.
I'm not sure. I think what we did do is we rejected some of the parenting styles we saw in favor of things that we wanted to do. And because we were usually on our own without the influence of close friends and family, we developed, ways of doing things the way we felt they were right. And, of course, my husband and I don't always agree. He was raised by a German and English parents, and I was raised by my American parents. My father was an educator. He was an expert in early childhood in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So he had some additional information and in-depth expert knowledge beyond his teaching that I think he tried out on us, and definitely influenced my parenting style. So there's always, to this day, there's conflicts between my husband and myself how to raise our children, and I think that's pretty normal. And then the countries around us, because we were at international schools, And that for sure influenced the available time we had with our children, because children were in school a lot longer, and then how we would spend our free time together. That would influence it as well. And more than parenting styles from different countries, I think our values are different from perhaps our neighbors here, because we've experienced different things, so we have different values and different things that are important to us than maybe people that are more monocultural and haven't moved around. That I think that would be more that our values have shifted or solidified compared to the people that only know one or two cultures.
Now that's very interesting. You said about values. There are a couple of things actually about the value system that you mentioned, and about the differences in bringing up children's styles. I have an important question before I ask the other one that I wanted to ask. You were American in in the American culture, because I do know that in the German culture, when a child is very young, probably a few months old, generally they're two separate systems people believe in. One system says, okay, the child should sleep alone because of independent, this is how they learn independence. And there's another system which is now a lot of hebamahs or the midwives now say no, they should be together with the family. Now how is it in the American culture, or how is it seen in yours, and what did you finally do? Because this is one of the, I consider one of the critical features of bringing up children, right, and begins right at the beginning.
I don't know what it's like in American culture. I have a US passport, but because I grew up most of the time out of the US, I'm not strongly influenced by that or really in touch with what's happening. And I think there too, got big differences in how people do it. I can only say what we did is with our first one, we tried to let her fall asleep by herself and, like let her cry and all that. And it was the most horrible thing that I've ever experienced. And with our son, I didn't want to do that. I wasn't convinced that it was the right thing to let a baby cry. And he wouldn't have it either. From a very small age, he would swing his whole self, even in a sleep sack, he would swing himself out of his crib and crawl to find us rather than lie in bed crying. So that wasn't an option. And with our third, it was simply a question of how much space we had. We had two rooms that were connected in our house in South Africa that were safe at night and not locked up. And so all of us were really together, or reasonably close. So it was more circumstances than anything that influenced how we started off with our children. And so I'm a firm believer in doing what works for the family. I think partially just from living in many different places, you're told in Germany, where you're told when you're pregnant, don't eat this and don't eat that and don't drink the wine and don't do that. And then you go to France and they're doing exactly those things that, or in Italy, that you're told not to do. So I've kind of developed this theory where, yeah, get the information and make your own decisions and do what's right and works for you as a family. And of course for you as a mom individually as well. So that's kind of my parenting theory, and try not to judge other people for making other choices.
You mentioned something about values. That is a very interesting point, because, in my opinion, that is very significant between countries and no, and then people.
I agree. I think there are underlying cultural values that countries have, and the models of culture tell us those. And so if you live it or are influenced by different cultures, like for example, the case of my husband, he never lived in England, but obviously his mother brought English values and English culture with her. So if you're impacted by different cultures, your values might shift or change. And for us, we actually sat down as a family a few years ago and did a values exercise where we named, it took the time to figure out to name our family values, our individual values and our family values. And then the question is, what do you do with that? Now we know that respect is a value. What does that mean in our everyday life and how we interact and how we want to be, how we want to act towards each other, towards others, how we want to be perceived and truly to be. And by knowing our values, that helps us make decisions. like respect is definitely one that we have as a family. You would think everybody probably has that, but one that we've named, that we worked out. And my youngest is now entering puberty, and respect for her parents is not high on her list right now, and sometimes, but having done the exercise, we know that as a family, it is something that's important to us. So we're able to have that conversation with her too and say, listen, I don't feel like this was respectful behavior, and then talk about her and consequences as well if necessary.
That's very nice. I'm glad this exercise that you all of you did together. That's very nice. So you identified the family values as vis-a-vis also the personal values, because sometimes there can be a difference.
And that's okay. We don't all share the exact same values or the same importance or rating of values, for example. I mean, one of my values is learning and curiosity, and my children do not share that learning value with me at this point. But that's fine. That's okay. They're different people, and that's just how it should be.
One of the things that with some other guests I was talking, and some people who had lived in Africa, one of the things that they mentioned very strongly, which was very appealing for them, was the community feeling, which they felt is still there, and in some other parts of the world, which in some regions of Europe and other places in the West might slowly be vanishing. What is your feeling and your experience?
I believe that everyone needs community. Belonging means being part of a community, and that is a fundamental human need. And if we don't have a sense of belonging, then we get sick. And so finding places where we feel belonging is really important. And some countries are easier than others to have that. In South Africa, we felt surprisingly a sense of belonging in places that we didn't expect it. And returning after 8 years last year, we landed and we felt that, and we had a hard time accepting it. We're not from here. We've been away. We were not South Africans, and yet they have this magical way of making everyone feel welcome. I'm not sure how they do it, but there's definitely something in Southern Africa that makes everyone that I've spoken to feel welcome. And that's a lovely thing. I'm not saying that South Africa doesn't have its own problems and issues, but our experience was one of warmth. That's not as easy in, say, Germany, for example, because the groups are there, but they're harder to get into. We have to build trust in different ways before you're let in. But there are communities in Germany, and we are fortunate now after 5 years, or 3, depending on how you count it, to be included in some of these. But it takes effort. It takes showing up. It takes an understanding of how it works, that it does take time, and that you are expected to show up and be reliable in coming, for example, in the Vereine. So my husband is in the tennis club, and it's not like, oh, when I feel like it, but he actually goes regularly, and that builds the trust in the community there. I joined a choir, same thing there as well. And through those things, we have definitely found a sense of community. But we've also created a sense of community with people here that are close, physically near us, that we have neighbors that we like, and that we then go out and say, come over, do this with us. You're invited to sit by the fire, we threw a street pizza party 2 years ago. Those sorts of things where you create your own community because we know how important it is, because we miss having it if we don't have it. So there's some of the experiences that we have, but sometimes it means we have to go out and create that and create whatever it is that we need ourselves, because it's not there just waiting for us.
I totally get it. There's also a thought which had occurred to me. For third culture individuals, and you yourself are one, and you have children who are third culture, is it that because of constant change in their lives, do they tend to have stronger family bondings vis-a-vis bondings with the world outside?
I would say on average, yes. The family bonds are stronger because that's the one constant that you have, best case, when you're moving. So that's the tie that holds you, that anchors you. There's a model by Dr. Barbara Knuckles that is a nice visual where a child has three anchors. They've got a close family that they live with. They have the place that they are, and then they have the people, the communities that they're in. And each of these anchors holds the child in a different way, but also sees the child and interacts with the child differently. And when we move, we only take the one anchor, the family, with us, and we lose the connection to place and community or people when we move and have to recreate it. And so those they're called mirrors as well, because they're showing back to the child, these are the values of the place, this is the behavior, this is what's expected, this is how we see you, what we see in you, what value we see in you. And when we move, we lose those two of three anchors and only maintain the one. So yes, the ties to the family members are generally stronger. Of course, not every child has the advantage of having strong family, loving families, caring families, which means that when they do move, it's very bad for children. And that's something that communities that move children, whether it's companies, churches, military, need to spend a lot of time looking at, because children do get into very bad situations, unfortunately, with nobody to care for them. But generally, the family connections become stronger. But if you think of this model too, it becomes even more apparent why we have to put down roots wherever we are to establish new connections, because it's not entirely healthy for children to only have the one anchor and mirror. They need the people and the place to help them sort of become balanced individuals as well.
You mentioned something interesting, to put down roots wherever one is, because one generally has the idea that you have one set of deep roots, and in the other places you just go and stay without putting in roots. Can you go a little more there, because that is very a very important aspect for people when they move constantly.
I think it's very important to have that sense of being where you are. And you spoke with Meg Norton recently, and she also referenced some of the literature. She's written a book herself, and Ruth and Rican on third culture kids. It's like, put down roots wherever you are. You don't know how long you're actually going to be here, and if you don't draw the energy from the soil, the people, and the surroundings, you're taking something away from yourself that will help you thrive and grow and become who you should be. And if we don't do that, I'm not going to connect to here because I'm leaving again. That's isolating, and that has a very strong impact on our mental and physical well-being. Having said that, it's difficult for children and their parents when you know that you are on a 2-year contract and you keep doing this, that you will have to say goodbye again. It's hard to overcome that and to go out and meet people again and to make new connections again. And as parents, then we have to understand why it's important, and then find ways to encourage our children and to support them in making those connections, because otherwise there are many long-term adverse effects of children that move constantly and don't manage to establish the connections and the putting down of roots for a little while they're there.
No, I gather that, but there's another alternate thought which occurs to me is it can also happen for children. For example, that when they move from place A to place B, for example, they say, "Why bother? In any case, I have to move. This is not permanent, so why should I even bother doing this and just go in a corner?"
And that's absolutely one way of coping for children, but it's not the healthiest way of coping. And so as parents and caregivers, it's important to understand that it's healthier for them to make the connections and break the connections when they leave than to not have them at all. And of course, children are, going to try to protect their hearts. And so we have to find ways to help them make connections in ways that still feel safe to them. And that might be not finding the one friend, but rather being part of something, joining a club, whether it's sports or music or arts, just to be part of something. And then, but not forcing an individual connection, but to be part of things, of experiences, because we can never get time back. We live 2 years in one place. That's 2 years of our lives, and of the life of a child, that's a lot. So we have to encourage them. I believe we have to encourage them to find ways to interact with people and not isolate themselves.
So again, that was a very important point, actually.
Yes, I'd like to recap that about the different cross-culture
Because they are
kids.
third culture. The question is third culture individuals who are not constantly moving but are born to two parents of different cultures and are again in a third country, another country.
That's one option, right? But they're all called cross-cultural children. And so you have the case of my husband was stay in the same country, but with parents of two different cultures. You have children of migrants, children of immigrants, children of with biracial parents, children of military families that move, children of missionaries that move, then the classic expats. You've got many, many different types of children that grow up with impacted by different cultures, and they all fall in the category of cross-cultural children. What sets the third culture kids apart as their group is the experience of mobility and of saying goodbye. So third culture kids have a lot of experience with starting in a new place and saying goodbye to friends and family and familiar situations and knowing how to act in a place. There's many visible and invisible things that TCKs say goodbye to when they move. And that sets them apart from the other types of cross-cultural children, which each have their own specific experiences that they share. But what we find is that all of these children, especially within each category, if we take just the third culture kids, for example, they find each other and they connect. So because they're not connected, you can have children that, say, of an Indian parent that grew up in Malaysia, and you've got American parents with a child growing up in Germany. But that experience of growing up in a different place and leaving and then moving to a different place again and again and restarting, they will connect over the experience they have, or the experience of being a third culture child, of having these saying goodbye and starting over, even if the countries and cultures that they're influenced by have no similarities or no common ground. But the experience of moving and all of that connects TCKs the world over.
So their adaptability is fairly high.
Yes, the potential to be adaptable is very high, but it's not a given. Also, resilience is not a given. It has to be fostered. It has to be encouraged. We have to help our children develop resilience and develop that through coping mechanisms. Otherwise, specifically in the case of TCKs, and there's a lot of recent research on this, the experiences of moving and saying goodbye count as adverse childhood experiences. And those can impact our health, both physical and mental health, for the rest of our life. So to counteract those negative impacts, we have to have positive childhood experiences and coping mechanisms. So how do we deal with goodbyes? Having some rituals around that, having a stable, at least one person in our life that is stable, recreating sort of a sense of home rather quickly when we get somewhere. I have a friend that always paints her living room dark red. So wherever she lives, she paints the living room dark red. And that's sort of one small way of making anywhere feel familiar. And that's just an important thing also for her, but also for her children, that familiarity wherever they go. And these are small things that count up. It's like grains of sand that make it a big thing to make the experience of being a TCK and moving a lot a positive one, to help build resilience, coping mechanisms so that they can develop all the wonderful positive sides of being flexible, of being adaptable, of being curious, of being world wise, to then use those skills to better the world. Because TCKs and all cross-cultural children have the potential to be great diplomats and work well within intercultural teams, help people of different monocultural experiences connect with each other. But it's not automatic. It's something that they have to learn and develop, but they are in a unique position to do that.
That's interesting. And in your case, you were fairly mobile in terms of moving. Did you face then an identity crisis at some point? It was so much movement and then role changes as well. A person is developing, and then when one becomes a parent, and then one ends up parenting in different locations. Did you at yourself at some point look back and say, what am I doing? Who am I?
Yes. I wouldn't call it a crisis, but there was definitely always a questioning of what am I doing here? Who am I becoming? But I think generally it was never a crisis, not for long. Parenting initially with small children, perhaps more, there were moments. um, but I have this deep curiosity, and that applies to everything around me, but also about to myself. Like, who am I becoming? What can I do? Where am I going with this? And how can I do something that I haven't done yet before? And I think that carries me through. But yes, it's always questioning, it's changing, and that I believe is a good thing. And I hope to pass on that sense of curiosity, and that it's okay to develop and change, and very normal to our children as well.
And where do you feel that you belong finally?
I don't know. Right now, I'm where I need to be. I found a job. That role has changed multiple times over the years, but I work in a position that I really enjoy, with people I enjoy working with, doing work that I believe is valuable. And we've put down some roots here. We have a community that we've helped create. So for now, I'm where I need to be. But if I'll still be here in 10 years, I don't know. I have no strong ties to any place or country. I don't identify with a passport or a culture per se. When asked, I will always say I'm an earthling. I'm a citizen of the world in some way. Now, that is a privilege to be able to say that. I have a passport that is considered a privileged passport that opens doors for me. So I'm very aware of that as well.
And if somebody asks you a question, where are you from?
Yes, that's something that the children get asked too. And we've talked about, how do you answer this question? So my answer is, well, I have a US passport, but I've lived in many countries, and currently I'm in Germany.
Lovely. Yeah, to make it simple.
What happens then is, if anyone's interested, then they can ask more questions. There's a risk that you give too much and people feel like you're bragging or going on, I don't want your life story. So it's a bit of a balance, but if people are interested, then they can ask further, or they just accept that and move on.
And if you could go back in time to that 4-year-old, if one could have influenced the flow of life and you had a say at that point in time, would you have then preferred a more stable, predictable life?
No. At times in my life, I envied my friends that had lived in the same place for generations and had this sense, they didn't even realize they had such a strong sense of they belong here. I envied that. But at the same time, I always felt they were limited by that. So it was kind of a two-sided thing. And I would not go back and change anything. No.
And right now, where and what is home?
Our house in Germany right now, our community, and where we have found ourselves more accidentally than intentionally, we're in southern Germany, and that's where we need to be right now.
Would you like to leave a message for third culture individuals or people who are even thinking? When I mentioned global mobility, in your case, it happened even then at that time. But what I see the trend is very voluntarily people are choosing to do because they want to go out and discover the world. And when they are going out to discover the world, they suddenly have a tendency, oh, I like this place, why not settle down? Or they meet somebody and then be there. So the global mobility by itself has increased at a very high pace. So a lot of people do not even realize what they are entering into when they
Yeah.
decide to do that. So having said that, would you like to leave your 2 bits, and what would those 2 bits be?
Well, don't be afraid to do it. Go with curiosity, and withhold judgment. I think that's something that I would want everyone to do. And it's worth reassessing every so often. Nothing is final until we have no breath left. So we can always change and reassess and readjust. And that's the beauty of being globally mobile, that we have that opportunity. So nothing is final or finished. And give it a shot, and if it doesn't work, then do something different.
I like that statement. Actually, nothing is final. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Anna. And I
Thank
wish you
you.
all the best on your continued journey of mobility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye bye.